Curious about how the top fintech companies in the world do content? Yeah, so was I. 2 years ago, I was searching for case studies, tips, benchmarks on how content works specifically for fintech and financial services. And I couldn't find much. A lot of content and just marketing advice in general focuses on SaaS, which is quite different to fintech. I always say this. So we set out to do our own interviews. And over the past couple of years, I've been able to talk to amazing marketing leaders at companies like Adyen, Pleo, Comply Advantage, and many more. And we've turned all these case studies into an ebook where you can read them all in one. We launched it along with a virtual event a few weeks ago, and you can download the ebook for free, replay the event at tinyurl.com/mint-report. That's mint-report. Or you can just head to our homepage at mintcopywritingstudios.com and you'll find it there. Anyway, let's get into today's episode, which is kind of in a similar vein. As I just said, a lot of marketing advice sounds good, sounds helpful until you apply it to fintech, where sales cycles are often years long. Attribution is tricky because you're meeting them in person. Yeah, the product is also complicated. The buyer journey is messy. Growth takes a different kind of thinking. In this episode, I'm joined by Paul State, Head of Demand Generation, and James Hayward, Content Marketing Lead at Primer. Primer is a unified infrastructure for global payments and commerce, and they help merchants gain more control and visibilities to optimize their performance of payments. Full disclosure, they are also a client of ours, and we've loved working with them over the past couple of years now, I think. But between them, they've led marketing across companies like Checkout.com, Tradeshift, and more, bringing real experience inside fintech, not just SaaS. And that's what we cover in this episode, what it actually takes to make marketing work in this kind of industry. Specifically, we go through traditional marketing playbooks and why they don't really work as well in payments, the go-to-market engineer and what does that really involve, and how do they operate as a lean, high-performing marketing team, and a lot more. This was a really fun episode. Let's dive in. You're listening to the Fintech Marketing Lab podcast. I'm Araminta from Mint Studios, a content marketing agency specialized in the fintech space. And this podcast is where we experiment, explore, and break down how fintech marketing actually works in practice. Each episode, I talk with top fintech marketers about what they're testing, what they're learning, and how they're pushing the boundaries of brand, strategy, and team building. With that, let's get into today's episode. The first thing that I wanted to ask is, you've both got quite a bit of experience working in marketing and fintech and payments. What would you say is different about doing marketing in this industry that not everyone talks about? Compliance, regulation, all of that. But what do you think when it comes to actually doing the work in marketing, do people maybe don't take into consideration when they do marketing for a fintech or payment company?
Yeah, it's quite a lot. I can go from a sort of content side of things. I think one of the hardest things about working, particularly in payments, is the product's really hard to show, particularly if you're on the PSP side where, essentially it's just Rails in the background. There's not really a massive amount to physically show, which I think makes life as a marketer a little bit hard because you're always relying on sort of descriptions of things like proof points and how trustworthy are those in the market? Data points you can give or take, right? Sometimes. So I do think that's a nuance about the payments industry. Obviously at Primer, we have a product we can show, which is nice. Ours is more of a technology platform. So it sits as a technology layer that you can use. But yeah, I do think payments is complicated because of so much happens in the background. And then tied to that, the nuance of it all. Payments is one of the most nuanced areas I've ever worked in. There are rules, but they are not universal in the same way. So if let's say you were doing a educational post, right? You would typically say, right, do these 5 things and things will improve. It's not really true in payments because you do those 5 things in Europe and they might improve, but they're not necessarily going to improve in the US or APAC. And it's true as well, when you think about it from a vertical level, if you're a travel business, you may be doing one thing, but then a gaming company might be doing the other. And it's like trying to speak to all those different personas and like cover those nuances without getting in a quagmire of complexity yourself is like super hard. And I think one of the biggest challenges as a content marketer in this space.
That's a really good point. And actually, you're right. Like, you guys have like a platform that you can share screenshots and stuff, but there's some companies it's just an API. Like, there's not much you can, you can't really show an API, right? And that's even harder. And really, what you're saying is that it's so, I don't want to say personalized, but it's so, it can be so different for each company that it can be really hard to make generalizations, right? And that's what makes it
Very
really
hard,
difficult. Paul, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think just touching on that, I think the broad, from a marketing perspective and targeting your like ideal customer profile can be quite difficult as well. Usually you're global first. So you're trying to target lots of different regions, specific countries all at once, which is even particularly hard when you're maybe a smaller business with limited funding. Is you need to really check who you're targeting and really be specific and almost do an ABM approach to your targeting. It's really hard to compete with like the big players on Google Ads. It's something that we actually backed away from is because it was just way too expensive. And so we're doubling down on more of the organic piece to try and get into that channel specifically. And then also like just the, not just the global, but also our product can touch a lot of different personas as well. And they all have different use cases of how they would use our product. So whether that is product, if they're more product central business, it could be finance for reducing costs. It could be an e-commerce manager who is more interested in the UX of the checkout experience. It's just so many different touch points. So to get all of that right can be quite difficult. And sometimes you need to go back to the drawing board quite frequently on, okay, which one works for us best? Who is the main stakeholder? Who are the influencers? And yeah, really use data to really go after what is working for you, because you can't go after everything.
I think what
We do try sometimes.
We do try sometimes. Yeah.
I think what I find so interesting about payments specifically is that it's the like veins of the company, right? Without payments, you cannot process revenue, really, right? It's such an integral part of a company, and yet it's more complicated than people think it is. And I would argue, especially smaller companies don't know much about payments, right? We all think it's very simple, right? You talk to a layperson about payments and they're like, yeah, whatever. It goes from one bank to another. And you're like, actually, there are acquirers, issuers. It's so much more complicated. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating to me, is that like on the surface, it's simple, but actually there's so much going on behind it. And it's what enables so many things that we take for granted very often. So it keeps things interesting.
There's actually, like, what I find really frustrating is a lot of the stuff out there when like you're looking at marketing guides and what other businesses are doing, it's usually against marketers, like as their audience. And marketers tend to be a lot more excited about the products and things in their day-to-day. And you usually find these businesses that target marketing have such a bigger community than something like a payments. It's hard to get sometimes excited about payments. And yeah, that can sometimes be a struggle as well.
And just to add to that as well, sorry, is like, I think with on that persona piece as well, I mean, you'd be very surprised at how many, even big businesses, don't have someone who solely looks after payments or who maybe is the first person who is looking after payments. And I think that's also really interesting in itself. Like, you're marketing to people quite a lot of the time who payments isn't their focus. Like, I actually interviewed one of our customers this week, and they look after 5 parts of their product.
Wow.
Payments are just 20% of their time. So again, in terms of like capturing their attention, capturing their mind share, you're not only competing against everyone else who's saying, similar stuff and, the bigger players that we talked about in the market, you're also just competing against their own mental load and sort of where cognitively they are at that moment in time. Like if that person happens to be thinking about one of the 4 other things they think about a day, they're just going to scroll past an ad around payments because it just might not resonate to them at that particular time. And that's just not uncommon as well in our industry as it stands at the moment. So I think that's another very interesting challenge when I compare that to like procurement, which I've worked in before. Every company has someone who's pretty solely looked after procurement on the most part. So, you know, that's all they think about day and night.
Yes, but on the other side of that, one thing I do like about payments is that it can be easier to demonstrate ROI in the sense that because you're literally touching the money. If you do anything, it could be saving fees, it could be enabling faster payments or more payment methods. It can be so much more easy to say, oh, we helped them save X amount of money. Whereas think of a SaaS like an Asana or whatever. You saved X amount of time and that equaled, it's so hard to be able to really put that into numbers. I mean, they will try, but I feel like one thing that's cool about payments is you can be a bit more like, show the ROI a little bit more easily. Would you agree with that? Do you think that helps or not?
I would say, I 100% agree with you. And I think when you do get those numbers, they're so powerful and they're so meaningful and, you know, they really do stand out. But you'd be surprised at just, again, going back to sort of what I was saying about how businesses think about payments, how many just don't have that data even to hand, where it's either sort of lost in some different systems or just something they don't look at. So I've had situations before where I've done case studies and I've been like, okay, what was your like uplift? What are your results? And like, we actually don't know what our baseline was. Like we're happy now, things are working. And then obviously that becomes a little bit more challenging. So I agree. Like I do think there is meaningful ROI that you can prove, but sometimes it's not quite as easy to uncover that as we'd like it to be. And I always feel bad, like when people come to me and say, "Have we got any data points around this?" And I'm like, "I'm sorry, I don't." And then it's like, it's not an uncommon thing that I have to do internally, which makes me feel a bit uncomfortable sometimes. But it's the nature of that. And the other side of it as well, just on data, like in terms of like ROI, is sometimes like people don't want to share it because it is so meaningful as well. So they might say to me, "Actually, like this, you could kind of reverse engineer this and see."
I see,
like how much we're growing and things like that. And if they're private businesses, I've come across it before where they just like say, sorry, we can't provide you with that information. So it's like a blessing and a curse, I think, in some respects.
That's a good point. So let's talk about how you do marketing at Primer, because I think what's really cool about what you guys do is that you're a lean team and yet you've been able to do a lot, and marketing is your main or one of your key growth drivers. And like, so for why don't you tell me a little bit, like, what is your team made up of, and what do you think has enabled you to be able to do so much with like a small but mighty marketing team?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting because we are lean, which can sometimes have its own troubles, right? It's like, what do you prioritize today? And even, we're managers and owners of our space, James and I, but we're also individual contributors. So it's like, how do you split your time between strategy and execution? And I think like what's been good at Primer specifically is that we have executive buy-in. We don't have to sell internally what we do, so we can focus on actually just doing it. A lot of the time, if we're presenting something to leadership, it's very easy to get sign off. They have real trust in the people that they've employed. So that just is another like bit of red tape that we don't have to worry about as much. And because we're so data driven, it's usually quite easy for us to find, okay, well, this worked well, let's do it again, or let's invest a little bit more this next time, or let's turn this off because we're not really seeing the results of it and it's taking up too much time. So I think like at Primer, it particularly has been quite refreshing coming in and just getting the job done and not worry about politics as much. But yeah, James, I don't know if you have anything else to say on that one.
Yeah, I agree. The sort of lack of hierarchy, for want of a better word, it is really important. So like if I need to speak to our head of product, if I need to speak to our CEO to unblock something or to get their input on something, not only are they willing to and actually want to, which is, a really interesting position to be in. Like I can get time with them on the same day, and that makes a huge difference. And I think implicitly, like Paul spoke to it, like there's trust there. I think we've delivered on targets quite regularly, always, progress to make. But I think it's not like we're constantly saying, oh, we're slightly behind here or slightly behind there. We've been pretty good at delivering. And then that just gives us the creative space to go and do other things. And, we're not fighting for our seat at the table. We have it already. I also think we've got a pretty solid team within marketing as well. You know, we are very lean. There's only like 4 or 5 like pure play marketers, but we all work very well together. We enjoy working with each other. We're very respectful of each other's ideas. Like, I'm the content guy, but if Juliana, who is in our demand gen team, comes up with an idea or gives me a rebuttal on something, I'm not going to be like, well, I'm the content guy, this is what I want to do. I'm very like open and receptive to that, and we find solutions together, and there's not those silos just don't exist, which, you know, I think we've all experienced in bigger companies where everyone has these very different initiatives that they're working on. They don't necessarily always jive together, and that just doesn't exist at Primer. It's everyone's striving towards the same overall set of goals. And I also think the goals are quite, they're ambitious, but they're not too, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not too sort of spread out all over the place. We're not trying to be all things to all people. We're quite focused, and we know what our core goals are as well. So we know that if push comes to shove in Q2, Q3, that certain things have to drop. There's never really much of a debate around, oh no, that needs to stay because that's my project. I've worked so hard on that. It's like, we know for the greater good, we now need to like focus here. So there's that flexibility as well in how we operate and the goals that we have, which I think is super helpful as well, because it just means we're not constantly like going down paths that aren't leading us anywhere.
Yeah, I have to say, like, of all the clients we work with, I think Primer is one of the companies that I see respects content. You'd be surprised at how many companies we work with where content is really at the bottom of the priority list. And because of that, we're able to experiment and try new things and do things that we wouldn't be able to do. And as you say, like, get access to experts and do some work with them that would be very hard to do in other companies because content is just like whatever. But here at Primer, it's very much like, as you say, because you've got that trust, you're allowed to test and you know, be creative with new things, which also makes it really exciting for us to try all these things as well. What do you think that comes down to? Is that like a top-down kind of, this is our culture? Is this just hiring the right people? Or what do you think has enabled that kind of environment?
It's a great question, and one that I haven't necessarily thought about. I think it's a mixture of both without sitting on the fence. I think there's definitely I think top down, like from our CEO, our head of product, as I said, like they are engaged, right? And they encourage others to produce content. So they will be like, hey, we should be posting about this on LinkedIn. Like they're encouraging, they see the value there, which is good. We also have, you know, for the other teams in the business, like we work a lot with product, we work a lot with the sales team and the customer success team. They're all happy to chip in, and I think they're not doing it because they want to boost their own personal brands, which I've, you know, seen before, and that's a great lever to pull, right? If someone wants to become like known for something, work with them, it works for both there. But within Primer, I think it's more, I think people are generally excited about what they're working on, as sort of cliche as that sounds, but it definitely comes through. I think we have interesting points of view that we want to share, and I think I'll give us some credit as well as the marketing team, right? I think we've done some good work to make people comfortable with how they work with us. They know that the workload's not going to be too much. They know that we're not going to be, you know, asking them to write every single word. We'll carry as much of the load as we possibly can. And I think that's also really helped. So I do think it's a sort of mixture of both. And it's found this real nice sweet spot where I can't remember the last time I came up to any barriers creating content because someone wasn't available or didn't have time for me. In fact, it's never happened at Primer. And that's remarkable, in fact, in 2.5 years that's never happened.
Yes, unfortunately, it is.
I think, like, just to add what James said, from a data perspective, which is very much where I live at Primer, I think the confidence that content is working for us down funnel really helps sell that as well. So, and with the thanks of Mint, we've been able to see a lot clearer data in what content is working for us, where we're seeing people coming on to blogs through organic search and then going on to fill in a contact form for a demo. That data is now quite accessible to us, which we didn't have before. And that also gave us the confidence to turn off the paid ads for Google, because we knew organically we were performing. And then we're able to see really what influence content has on opportunities and even contract values coming in. So I think that trust that obviously James has built through just creating content. We can now build trust to leadership and our board of like, this is actually why we're continuing doing it.
No, this is huge. This is why it's such a complicated world in a way, marketing, because attribution is getting harder in some ways and tracking is getting harder. But at the same time, the benefits of doing it is just so huge, because there's a lot of skepticism around marketing, I think, because it's so hard to track, that if you're able to track as much as you can, I always say, yes, it's hard. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try as hard as we can to do it. Then that allows you to, when you're able to do it and show, it just builds so much trust, which then allows you the freedom to try all these different things. And that was going to be kind of my next question, which is, yes, I think you've got a good balance of being data driven, but you're still able to try things that maybe are harder to measure, because it is true that often the activities or the investments that have the biggest impact are often the hardest to measure. And I was actually just going to ask, like, how have you been able to do that? Like, some of the campaigns that you've run and things that you've done have been maybe harder to track. How do you think you've communicated that to leadership? Is that just because you've gotten really good results in the past, and so now they're like, okay, we trust you? Or is there anything else to that?
It's a good question, and not everything can be tracked, right? I think there's a lot of stuff that we can create, either content or campaign-led or paid ads, that have an indirect link to things going down funnel. So when I look at the data on our side, direct and organic search is like the biggest pot of where people are going and then filling in a form. But actually, when you look at everything that we've been doing, everything impacts that.
Yes.
It's not just the campaigns that we're doing with and the UTMs that we're adding to these links. If someone comes onto our website directly, it might be that they've had a conversation, a word of mouth. They might have met us at an event or seen our logo somewhere, or searched on an LLM of like, what is payment orchestration and what are the top companies that I should be talking with. I think like all of those things we can't always track, and we do try to track some self-attribution level of measurement as well, which shows that actually it's not just where we see they come in from straight away. It's actually all this other stuff that they've done, because they're likely at that point have done a lot of research beforehand, and everything that James has created on his side is actually impacting the results on the end of it. So I think it is a collective, and I think marketing teams need to realize, like, especially when it comes to branded type plays, not everything can be attributed towards it, but you should naturally see an effect on the direct and organic search traffic being increased.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's very interesting. Like, we've had lots of discussions, Paul and I, about attribution over the years, tracking the untrackable to a degree. And I think one of the things we also look at, not formally, but more sort of just like anecdotally, is how people are filling out contact forms, the language they're using. And we have noticed a change over the past 18 months of people using different language. They'll be using vocabulary that we may use that others do not, or they may describe certain challenges they have in ways that I know for a fact we've described like this challenge word for word on a blog. Is it like huge. A one-to-one? Yes, they've read that and come and done this. We don't know, but we can. I think those softer signals are so important in marketing. In a world where data and attribution is so important, I do think trusting your gut a little bit as well, and spotting those signs that are a bit more harder to concretely say, yes, X has led to Y, but I think you see it over time, and we just feel like, okay, the market's getting it now. It's changing a little bit, and very hard to concretely say exactly why and what led to it, but I think it's just a combination of all those efforts. And to go back to your original question as well around like, how do we get leadership buy-in to do those things that are perhaps a little bit more untrackable? It's quite easy, actually, because we co-create with them. Like, I don't think ever in marketing we come up with anything in a silo and say, right, we're going to build this campaign because this. Like, it will be built because we'd had a conversation with somebody else in the business or a group of people in the business, and got their input into something, taken all of those data points from around the company and thought, okay, what's the best way to apply this to a marketing campaign? So I think it's again, we there's no silo of marketing. We're not sitting there like coming up with our own ideas. They're very much ideas that are generated with products, with sales, with customer success, the leadership as well, which again just makes it so much easier to sell back to the business because you're selling them their own
that's
idea.
great.
Just packaged up.
Yeah, just touching on that, because we're a remote first company, we rely heavily on Slack. And we have so many like interesting channels internally where our leadership are, where other people around the business are, and the conversation is always free flowing. Like someone might have an idea, or we might have had a conversation with an existing customer, and like all that information gets fed back into Slack. And then like you can just really find what's useful to our ideal customer, and then build content off of the back of that, and work in collaboration. And because our leadership is so intertwined with all of those conversations, they can see it happen naturally. So yeah, it's a really good mark on like what we're doing. And just what James said also about the contact forms, which is interesting. All of our forms and all of the data, intent signals also go into Slack with enriched data. Now, what's great about that is if James posts like a case study, and the next day someone has filled in a contact form and says they're interested in X, and X is actually talked about heavily in that case study, yes, it's not going to be attributed one-to-one, but instantly James or our head of marketing, Jade, might instantly be like, well, this is pretty obvious that it's come in because we've posted this. So it's really easy to see the connections because all of that information is all in our Slack and everybody has eyes on it.
Oh, that's really... well, I want to touch on AI in a second, but I think what you're kind of saying here is storytelling, right? When you've got like, even when it's qualitative, you can still show leadership a little bit of a story of like, look, they discovered you through this case study. You can see that they have been reading some of your content because they use some of these words. It's kind of, you're showing a little bit of story, and that's ultimately what gets leadership to understand a bit better the role of marketing and kind of what's happening. So yeah, no, that's really cool. So I wanted to touch on, Paul, you've been interviewed by Sifted on an article on the GTM engineer. And here we can talk a bit about AI and some cool ways that you've been implementing AI as a lean team and also getting the most out of your data. So I guess, first of all, what is a GTM engineer? Can you explain that and what that means? And yeah, what are some examples of the kind of things you've been doing and in that kind of realm?
Yeah, it's a world that I have completely it's taken over my life this last like year. GTM engineer, coined by Clay, like a data enrichment automation tool, essentially takes what is a operational role and really builds upon all the tools that we have today around AI and automation to help sales, marketing, customer success teams be more efficient. And really, a GTM engineer is someone that just likes to tinker with things and likes to figure out solutions to things that they're seeing. We've created a few things here. We have a great partner, Arshia, in our operations team that I partner very closely with, and we build so many interesting tools, and some of the ones that like I think like everyone's like used to seeing, but it's so much easier to actually create these things now with AI. You're vibe coding a tool. I myself, like last summer, I went through like a phase of just creating loads of like tools that I built myself through vibe coding. So like UTM trackers and email signature builders. And,
it's addictive.
Just like really like basic stuff like that every organization should have. But usually you have to pay a subscription, and usually it's a tool that doesn't really intertwine very well with your internal processes. We initially just built some of that stuff out. But some of the things that are more impactful is definitely like utilizing platforms like Clay, where you can get intent signals. And instead of like partnering with all of these different data sources and tools, Clay has access to all of those tools through tokens. So you can very much use their data source to figure out intent signals like web visitors, who's searching your subjects on review websites, job changers, people that's been promoted in your active account lists, who's had funding recently, who's liked and commented on a LinkedIn post that's either your company has posted or someone in your business has posted. I think like what you then do with that is like post it into a channel like Clay, assign an owner, give them more information, like give them direct links to their LinkedIn page and like why it's come up, what pages that they've visited. And then you're taking out all of that like pain admin stuff that a salesperson doesn't really have time to do. And you're basically saying like, hey, this person's been on our website, they've viewed these pages, here's a LinkedIn, here's the top like person we recommend you reach out to based on who we typically convert with down the funnel, and then go and do it. I think like AI is in a really interesting space right now where the velocity of different tooling and automation that you can do is crazy. And we actually have got to the point now where we just can't keep up with every tool that's coming like and being created. It's almost like every week there's a new thing to add.
Yeah.
But yeah, the GTM engineer, I think like every business should really have a person that is dedicated to building and automating these tools and saving the company time and money. Typically, you know, if you have a 100-person company, you could be operating as a 1,000-person company if you get the right tooling and AI in place. Like this is how you compete with the big dogs out there if you're a startup.
And just so I understand better, like what you're doing with Clay, does that mean that you've got, I don't know, like I've used it a little bit and it is super powerful and I can see what you're saying. Is it kind of like a spreadsheet that you have with maybe your target accounts, and then it just kind of refreshes regularly with those different things you mentioned? So they liked a LinkedIn post or they got promoted, and that the tool then just refreshes and you can, I don't know, the salesperson can see that. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different ways that you can utilize it. That's definitely one of them. So like you can, for example, we've like listed all of our active accounts. So whenever Salesforce is updated, the table in Clay is updated. And then whenever the intent signal happens to one of those accounts is when it triggers the notification back into Slack. So like, that's definitely like one way you can do it. Or if you want to build something from scratch and you don't have that data, you don't even have to go into Clay anymore. You could go into something like Claude and link Clay, and you could be like, hey, you know, I like this company is really interesting to us. Find 20 other companies that are the same, and then it will spit that out. And then you can be like, okay, now give me 3 contacts per company, and like all within an AI chat, you can get this information without any experience to go into a platform like Clay, which can be it's not complicated, but it's, if you're not into that space like all the time like I am, then it will take you a lot longer. But if you could just do that in an AI chat and get the information you need, imagine how much time that saves a BDR or a sales rep.
That's huge. How about you, James? Like from a content perspective, I know you've been also experimenting a little bit with AI and building a few workflows. What are some cool things that you've done in that area and that you've found really helped you?
Yeah, it's not been quite as natural to me as it has been Paul. I'll be the first to admit that. I've been using AI for a long time, actually, probably for 3-4 years, like using ChatGPT and using it to sort of help with content production in certain ways. Recently, I've been thinking about it a bit more deliberately, I guess, and trying to break free from just a prompting-based way of working. So I did last year, did build a sort of workflow to help our team be able to write LinkedIn posts in their tone of voice. It was somewhat successful. We used NAN to do it, which is probably a little bit complicated actually in sort of like a spreadsheet flow. You probably wouldn't need to do that now because the tooling's moved on so far. It was, it worked, but it did the intent, which was to get people used to posting and feeling more confident about it. So that worked in its own respect. I'm actually currently, as a bit of a side project, building a tool to basically create a bit of competition amongst people at Primer to be posting on LinkedIn. So that's something that I'm working on slowly in the background. I'm refusing to pay for another tool, so I'm using Lovable's free credits. So it's taken a little while, so I'm doing that. And then I think one of the biggest things actually, and Paul sort of introduced the whole team to this on a workation we had recently, was just using Claude Code. Now, obviously not a coder at all, but the sort of way we're using it as sort of a day-to-day project management context repository. So linked, probably you could see this better than I can, but like linked to Obsidian, where it's holding all of our context that we're feeding it, and then using it for what's on my agenda today. What was the last thing I spoke to Paul about when we had our last one-to-one? Like what action points do we need to take from it? That kind of stuff I'm finding very, very useful just from a keeping track of all the different projects that we've got going on and making sure that, things are being done on time. And then equally, it's making content editing easier. So one of the things we spoke about before, Araminta, is like I said that like I found ChatGPT and all of the LLM seem to have gone backwards a little bit with content, and maybe it's just as well we're just used to seeing all the rubbish out there, right? We all know the sentence structures, we all know the way things are framed, and I was getting a bit sick of it, and I was just finding actually it sort of taking the joy out of my work a little bit, and I was like, I don't know if I want to be doing this for like another 10 years if this is what it's going to be like. So I went back old school, doing things properly, listening back to transcripts rather than just saying, hey, transcribe this for me, and then building stuff out, which has been a useful exercise. But I have found like now that Claude Code in particular and with Obsidian is all loaded with the context of Primer and how we work, our tone of voice, and it's very much helping on like the feeding it a finished draft and being like, right, okay, make this sound uniform to how Primer should sound. And I think that's like a really useful thing that I started to do, particularly as we expand and grow as a team, or if we use freelancers or agencies like you guys. Like, it's just a helpful tool for everyone to have then, so that it doesn't matter who creates content for Primer across the business or externally, it all sounds the same. And I think that's like a use case that I'm going to continue building on. We're going to build some skills and things to help with that as well. So
nice.
Yeah, some exciting stuff there. And that's just scratching the surface as well. There's loads more that we can definitely
I think it's interesting what you're saying as well. Like, it is true how the tools, like 1 year ago, we obviously did the whole GPT projects or GPT, custom GPTs and all that. We have that for every client, but like it was never as good. And I feel like I agree with you now with Claude Code finally, where I asked it to write an article based, because I always say like your output is as good as your input. And because we're able to interview experts, that input is gold. Like, you can't get better than that. And because of that, now I feel like finally we're getting like some really good stuff with Claude Code. I've been playing around with it as well. And now, but as we always say, you do need a person to edit it and review it. But I feel like we're slowly finally getting to a place where it can be good enough, but it requires really good input. And I would also say, as you said, like a big body of work. If you're starting from scratch and don't have any content, that you should start with a person writing, because if not, like the content won't be good enough. But I think like companies that have already quite a bit of content and experience, that's where there's a lot that you can use it for.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think like I'm definitely not against using it to speed up processes, create more like faster. I think that's all very good, but just don't ever lose the craft, because as you said, what you put in matters so much. And I think like for me, it's just I always do an acid test with anything I read actually now, because you don't know if it's been written by a human or by an AI. Whether it's been written by a human or AI doesn't necessarily matter. Actually, it's more, does the person who pushed it out in whichever form or channel they're doing, did they understand what they were saying?
Yeah.
And did they actually is the intent behind what they were saying is being what's delivered? And that's the acid test I use for just anything now. Like when I read a paragraph, I'm like, do I understand that? Because if I don't understand that, I'm not putting it out under one of my colleagues' names or my name or whoever it is. And I think that's another area where I think the industry as a whole risks falling into a bit of a trap, where people, I see it all the time on LinkedIn, where people are just, it sounds pretty and they've used some great words and stuff, but I'm like, you have no idea really what that means. And it's not delivering
got a
at
real
the
issue
intent.
now.
Yeah.
I mean, just if you scrolling through LinkedIn, like you just know who has used it and who hasn't customized that prompt to create it, and everything has started to feel the same. And we are a huge risk of that, right? But yeah, when using AI, we just all need to become like prompt masters and utilize our expertise to get the results we need. There's just using a basic prompt or GPT now is not enough. You have to give it so much more context, whether that is tone of voice, your business, like existing content that you've created. If you are able to give it everything, then and prompt it correctly, you will get the results that you need. But yeah, if you don't and you keep it very basic, you're going to get rubbish.
Yeah, and this is why you could argue you need a GTM engineer, because like it's not enough to just just use ChatGPT. You need someone who's going to spend some time building the systems and the processes to actually have something good. And usually you're going to have to need someone who loves doing that, because if not, they're not going to want to do it. I wanted to end on the Payment Pioneers series that you did. I think it's a year ago now or a year and a half ago. And I thought it was really cool and a really good, I imagine great for marketing, of course, but also I imagine really good for you internally to get a really good understanding of your target audience. So could you share a little bit what that Payment Pioneers series was about and what kind of impact did you see from it? What are the benefits that you got from that campaign?
Yeah, I'll go back in time to November 2024, which is when it launched. So it was at its core, it was a research paper with customer interviews, and the genesis behind it, or the sort of like main theme is like, who are payment leaders? We've gone full circle from what we were talking about at the start, right? Where payment leaders aren't necessarily very well defined it's not defined as a profession. It's not necessarily defined as a role, and we're selling to these people, but we don't necessarily know who they are all the time, and like what keeps them up at night, what makes them tick, what they want to do, like where they even came from in terms of their career. So the point of this was really just to not worry about selling any products or anything like that. It was just to like, hey, who are you? Like, tell us about yourself. And like, we run a research survey, asked them all that types of questions. Like, yeah, what roles have you previously done? Who do you report into? What do you like about the role? What don't you like about it? Like that kind of stuff. Supplemented that with 8 interviews with people who are running payments in various guises globally, different size companies, and just really tried to get a snapshot for, the end of 2024. What does a payment leader look like? And that was really the point of it. We also, from a marketing perspective, just thought it's just a refreshing angle.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not pushing out a product or a feature or like, hey, look what we can do for you. It's like, hey, learn about your peers. Like, and I think it goes down to probably a longer term thing that we were trying to build at Primer, which is like becoming a bit of a voice for payment leaders and the people that we work with. By nature, like, we are agnostic.
Yes.
So we can help them and be that platform for them to speak. And we're bringing Payment Pioneers back.
No way.
It's an exclusive
Cool.
for your podcast, Araminta.
Very cool.
At least the interviews for this year. So I completed one this
Nice.
week. So yeah, we'll be rolling those out again, because we didn't do them last year, but I do think it's something we want to pick up again and start doing. In terms of the impact, I think we actually took a bit of a bold move and ungated everything. So I was thinking
Which,
about
as you
this,
can imagine, as someone
tracking,
running demand gen, is always
Yeah.
a concern when we try to do that.
Yeah. So can we say that like it led to X amount of deals and business? And this is probably when we were a little bit less sophisticated as well, right? From like a tracking perspective overall, given, we're talking about 18 months ago. But I think it was one of those, like, going back to like, we trusted our gut. Like, there was no way that this couldn't be interesting to our audience, right?
Exactly.
And for us, it's a case of like just putting Primer on the map a little bit. Another, like, they see our logo, they see us involved in this, and they think, okay, that's good. And I think it certainly helped from that perspective. It certainly helped deepen relationships with the people we interviewed and sort of get to know a bit more about them. It's helped me because I now have like their contacts and I can message them and get things that I need from them, which is great. Interesting for the business because they found out some things they perhaps didn't know.
Were they all customers, or was it a mix of customers and potential customers?
It was a
Okay,
mix.
interesting.
There was some pushback internally for why we didn't just do customers, but I said I don't want to make it like a Primer customer exercise. I care about like, just do they do the job? And yeah, I think it tied to that as well. I think it was one of the first things that we'd done as Primer that was a bit more, that was not about us. And I think that was quite a brave step to think, actually, we don't just need to spend our marketing dollars, time and effort on hammering home Primer. There are other ways that we can, resonate with our audience without talking at all about us. So it's an interesting exercise in that respect as well. Paul, I don't know if there was any like direct results that we saw off of it, but again, I know we left it. It was more a brand building exercise than anything else, right?
It goes back to what we were saying before, right? Like, this is the type of stuff that does affect us. It might not be direct, but it increases our voice and our visibility, and that is important, even if you can't share that all the time.
And you're able to do that because you have the trust and you've been able to hit your results in the past. So it's like, okay, yeah, let's do that. It's also context of the situation that you're in that allows you to do these things, which is also really exciting. But yeah, I really enjoyed reading it. And I think the reason I really liked it was because it was different, as you say. I hadn't really heard that perspective before. And it was a good way of showcasing a little bit kind of the pain points that people have And I imagine as a marketer, also, it must have been fascinating to learn about what it's like to be a payment leader, because you're right, they're not really, these people are very rarely interviewed. They don't really go on podcasts. People don't really know what they're thinking every day. So yeah, no, I thought it was a really good way of showcasing your ideal customers' kind of problems and all that. So no, I thought it was a great campaign. So last question, quick fire. What's the first tool you'd implement if you're starting a new marketing job at a fintech? Brand new job, first tool that you'd implement, what would that be?
Yeah, I've talked about Clay too much, and my team are also sick of me saying that, but it won't be Clay actually, although it would be probably a fast follow. It all comes down to data collection in a DG role, and every business that I've ever joined, the first thing I do is make sure the forms on the website are collecting the right information. If you don't have that, it's hard to do anything else, to be honest. So yeah, one that I've partnered with in several companies now is Formulate. It just allows you to not only take in the information that's standardized across our industry, but also the stuff that aren't as standardized, and the language that you talk internally, you can convert that information easily back into your CRM system. So yeah, that's always one that I implement.
Love Formulate. I think it really shares a lot of good information that has helped us as well understand the impact of content. So really cool. How about you, James?
I'm going to slightly twist the question because it's not necessarily a tool, although you could maybe class it as one. But as a content person, I think it's just having either a great writer who can support you or a great agency, right? I've been lucky to find Mint. There you go. There's your plug. And, after searching, like working with a lot of agencies, again, we spoke about this before, like, you guys get our business, you are my team, right? And I think, if I was to go into any business really, even if I had a team already, I would still probably look for that external person or people who you could offload to some work but who get it, right? Because I think otherwise it just creates so much more work for you. So for me, like particularly working in startups primarily, it's just having that support, and I don't think any tool can really replace that.
That's a good point. Well, appreciate the kind words, and definitely having people who understand, especially in a complex industry, right? Like that just saves a lot of energy. So it's a huge deal. But yeah, amazing. Well, thanks so much, James and Paul, for coming on. This has been really interesting, digging into other sides of primers marketing that I'm not so familiar with. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm looking forward to seeing the new payment pioneers this year.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thanks for listening. You can find show notes and information about guests at www.mintcopywritingstudios.com/podcast. And finally, huge thanks to Orama.tv for producing this podcast. Thanks for listening, and see you at the next episode.